Hi, welcome to TST Broadcasting and the State of the Industry channel. This is Shep Altshuler, president of TimeSharing Today and the Timeshare Board Members Association. Today, we are being joined by Marty Kandel, principal and general counsel of the newly formed Timeshare Advisory and Resolution Service. Marty has an extensive and diversified background in the timeshare industry, and we will be discussing changes that have taken place in timesharing and his approach to resolving some of the challenges facing owners, developers, owners associations, and other industry providers. Hi, Marty. Welcome to the broadcast.
Thanks for having me, Shep.
Tell our listeners about your background in the industry. It's been quite extensive.
Well, as a young man graduating law school, I had done work in as an intern for the Maryland Attorney General's office, and upon graduating, there was an opening to represent the Maryland Real Estate Commission, amongst other agencies. So I did so, and in the midst of that job, there was what was then known as a timeshare crisis in Ocean City, Maryland. And the Attorney General called me in and said, "What do you know about timeshare?" And I said, "Not a thing." And so in 1982, I commenced my learning curve because there were some bad actors and doing some bad things, and I ultimately helped craft and pass the Maryland Timeshare Act. So I got into the industry as a regulator, which is somewhat unusual, and my job was to prosecute timeshare developers and to investigate timeshare developers. And at some point, I left the Attorney General's office, as a lot of young lawyers do, to represent timeshare developers. Later on, I became a timeshare developer in Maryland and also in Florida later on in Daytona Beach. I went on to work overseas in Australia for Accor Hotels and in Europe for Diamond Resorts, and came back home, and I've been working pretty much on my own since returning to the States. So I'm still very much interested in timeshare, and I get starting a new entity to kind of move that type of work forward.
Okay, so is there a specific focus of your current efforts? Are you looking at a broad spectrum beyond just the timeshare consumer? Are you looking at legacy resorts? Are you looking at developers? Where will you be focusing your primary efforts?
Well, I've started a group called the Timeshare Advisory and Resolution Services, or TARS, and I'm really committed to trying to help legacy resorts and HOAs. I think developers and active sales have plenty of representation through ARDA. I think consumers are less protected through ARDA Rock, although I don't have any issue with ARDA Rock because they are a developer association. But I have real compassion for a lot of folks that find themselves as timeshare owners at the back end of the spectrum. They've been owners for 25, 35 years in resorts that are starting to fade a bit. And a lot of HOAs and boards really aren't sure what the next step should be in their life cycle. So that's where my interest is, and that's where my concentration will be.
Now, you mentioned dealing with a crisis 25, 30 years ago in Maryland, if that time frame is right. And what do you see happening relative to the developer community in contrast to what you were experiencing back then? Has anything changed within the developer community?
I think a lot of things have changed from the 1980s and 90s. There were just, a lot of entrepreneurial spirits, which is a kind way of saying it was still a little bit of the Wild West. There was no regulation. Self-regulation clearly wasn't working. Most of the original timeshare developers came from the land sales industry or the home improvement industry. So from a regulatory standpoint, obviously the landscape has changed. Most of the large developers now are publicly traded companies, the Marriotts, the Hiltons, the Starwoods. So the concerns aren't quite the same. What has changed, I think, is the nature of the product and an opportunity for consumers to understand what that product is and what they're buying and how to best use it. Those issues are still very prevalent.
And when we look back at the legacy resorts and their owners, so from that time frame when you first got involved, what do you see happening with the legacy resorts? This is an area that I'm heavily focused on through the Timeshare Board Members Association and TimeSharing Today and the legacy owners. And we're very sensitive to the fact of the aging conditions that are taking place at that segment of the marketplace. So what's different now than was back in the 80s and early 90s?
Well, I think in the 80s and early 90s, everybody was excited about having a perpetual product, a lifetime of vacations, a product that could be passed on, to their children and their grandchildren, and that was the way the product was pitched. And I don't think anybody really thought back in the early 80s, for example, that be getting to a point now in 2020, 2030, that a lot of these resorts are going to start to sunset out and expire. So what has happened in essence is that the timeshare secondary market has not developed. And there are a lot of reasons and debates as we can talk about why that's the case. But the fact is that for a lot of legacy resorts, the smaller resorts, the more boutique type of resorts in location and in style, there's not a secondary market. And a lot of children and grandchildren don't want the product because there are many different ways that they now vacation. And there's these ongoing maintenance fees that over the course of these decades have done nothing but increase. So legacy resorts in general, and not all legacy resorts are the same. Some are obviously financially more healthy. Some have kept up with the times. They have on-site sales. They have recycled their inventory. They have maintained their resorts in tip-top shape, and others not so much. So, everybody's got to take a step back and look at the situation they're in and decide what will best serve their owners. In some cases, that may be winding down the resort and repurposing it. In other cases, it may be taking a look at their product and putting some add-on product into the mix and attempting to find a market to a new generation of buyer. So anything is possible, but it's hard work and it's time consuming, and most folks who bought their timeshare just to relax and vacation aren't really equipped now to take the charge and try to figure out what to do next. So I'm hoping to be able to, with your help, through your organizations, step into that void and offer assistance where it makes sense to do so.
It's pretty well recognized that there's a lack of a vibrant resale market. And why have timeshare owners consistently been the victims of fraud? And do you think that the lack of this resale marketplace is the significant cause?
Well, in a situation where there's face-to-face, one-on-one sales, and you cannot underestimate the skills of salespeople. It's an emotional sale, and people, come to these sales presentations almost solely to get the free gift. The next thing they know, they're spending $15,000, and in a circumstance where it's buy today, you don't get the deal tomorrow. So people are sold, and people are overwhelmed, and they're asked to kind of understand a lot of information in what I'll laughingly call a 90-minute period, but it's a lot to absorb, and it's hard to explain to people, not just in the timeshare realm, but sales is an art form, and it's a science, and these salespeople do a great job in painting a picture and putting the prospective customer in that picture, and describing their product in ways that tend to leave out the negatives. The negatives are, obviously the maintenance fees that continue to go up, and the lack of a mechanism, to get out of a timeshare once you want out. This is a perpetual product in a lot of cases. There is no out per se, short of a resale, And the fact that there is no resale market is, I can assure you, never discussed at a timeshare presentation. So once there's a void, and resale being a void, now you have fraudsters stepping up. And, we're one of the few industries, that being timeshare, where people are responding to advertising that says, let us help you get out of your timeshare, and they'll pay $3,000, $4,000, $5,000 and more to get out of their product. And that's almost unheard of. Many of these companies are preying upon the owners, the older legacy owners who simply want out. And they've enjoyed 25 years of vacations, and their children don't want their timeshare, so they try to list it for sale, and they pay upfront listing fees to companies that have no means to sell their property. And that's how it begins. And so the lack of a secondary market has just opened the door for fraudulent companies, preying on owners who want nothing more than just to move their timeshare out of their names into somebody else's. So there are a lot of scams attached to that. It's only getting more sophisticated, and in the end, a timeshare owner just feels as if, my goodness, I was happy all these years, and now there's just no way out, and I keep spending money to get out, and nobody's here to help me, and it's very frustrating.
We have also seen a proliferation of organizations that charge owners thousands of dollars to help get them out of their timeshare obligations. Now, this is different than a boiler room operation that's just going after the dollars and not doing anything. Now, why are these companies offering this solution and getting literally, $3,000, $5,000 or more? Why are they having such great success?
Well, again, they're preying upon a real void in the marketplace. And you're getting these timeshare owners that are desperate, or think they need to be desperate to get out of their timeshare obligations. So they'll pay, upwards of $5,000, $6,000, $7,000 to get out of the obligation. And many of these companies have a great funnel. They have celebrity spokespeople will get you out. Timeshare is terrible. So they get sucked into that. They pay the money. These companies issue these guarantees, and I put the word guarantees in quotes because some of these guarantees aren't worth the paper they're written on. And so up front, the companies are great taking you in, but on the back end, to actually get rid of your timeshare, they're not so good. And many of them then resort to what is known as the Viking ships, which are basically setting up LLCs, shell companies, transferring these weeks, and then no one else ever picks up the obligation. There is no actual buyer on the back end that continues to pay maintenance fees to sustain an HOA. So it's a vicious cycle, a vicious circle, and the actual number of transactions that wind up in the hands of third-party maintenance fee paying new members are few and far between, I'm afraid.
Now, it seems that these companies, some of them that have some national prominence, have been successful at convincing, and I'm putting convincing in quotes, at convincing developers and maybe legacy resorts to actually take back the weeks and get the owners legitimately off their obligations to pay. So that we see is happening, and that tactic seems to be working. Do you agree with that?
Well, I do to an extent, but there's a tremendous lack of transparency in terms of which developers will take back their weeks. Why would a consumer have to spend upwards of $5,000 to give back their week if the developer is taking them back directly? So there's lots of questions that I would have into how the process works today. Why there's a need for these companies to really do nothing but shuffle on, a particular week when they have a relationship with a developer. And the developers themselves tend to take back weeks for a period of time, and then they stop taking them back, or they only take back from this fellow and not this one. So it's a very Byzantine type of, I call it the Underground Railroad of returning timeshare to its original source to be resold. There perhaps is some concern on the part of developers that they're seen to be taking back, these weeks and then reselling them at full price. I'm not really troubled by that. I am troubled by the consumers having to pay so much money just to unload their original timeshare.
Now, what should owners do before deciding to spend any high upfront fee, regardless of whether it's a high upfront fee with a listing company or a company that promises to help them exit their timeshare obligations? What should owners do before deciding on that?
Well, what they should be doing is to take their situation in hand and call the developer or call the resort and HOA directly to see what options are available to you. Many resorts will take back the week because they have a means to resell. They may have a small resales operation on site or other arrangements that they've made. Many will accept a maintenance fee payment or two in exchange for a release of obligations. Developers as well, are when they look at a customer who's been a valuable and loyal customer for a couple of decades, and now their personal circumstances have changed. Many seem to be more willing to look at those circumstances. There are organizations. My organization, for example, is set up in part to help consumers, and in terms of dealing with their developer or resort. But clearly, don't go and spend thousands of dollars to something that could be done, on your own, and it may only cost you a maintenance fee or two. It's just a smarter way to go. These companies don't have magic where they can guarantee that your timeshare will be properly disposed of. It doesn't work that way. They're more marketing companies than they are actually success-based companies.
Now, part of our consumer awareness message that we have at TimeSharing today is we tell owners not to enter into any binding agreements, particularly long-term agreements, without consulting an attorney. Now, they're at a little bit of a disadvantage when they go on a timeshare presentation to buy into a vacation club where they have to sign, while they're there in order to get copies of the sales offering to take to an attorney. And they do have a rescission right that may be a minimum of 3 days and maybe a maximum of 10 days. But in my opinion, and talking to a lot of owners, they don't consult with an attorney. They sign off and they go home. They may not even be aware of the rescission rights under the contracts, and then they feel stuck because they didn't realize that some of the representations didn't line up with what they found to be the realities of the purchase. So are you playing a role in that area through your company now? Where are you in the relationship of the timeshare owner's attorney and the contract, and how do you see yourself fitting in to be a help because you have such an extensive background in the industry?
Obviously, I would be in a great position to review contracts on behalf of a consumer. My goodness, I've drafted some of those contracts, but in a lot of cases, you really need to take a look at it. As I mentioned earlier, you've got a lot to absorb in a sales presentation, and then you get rushed through the paperwork, and you're signing acknowledgments. And of course, one of the things you're signing is don't rely on any oral representations in conjunction with this sale of this timeshare. And you've just sat through 3 hours of nothing but oral representation. So it really behooves you to go through these documents. And today's vacation club, it's very interesting. You're not necessarily buying a product that consists of real estate. You're buying into a points-based trust, and you have you own, and I use that term loosely, an undivided interest in the trust, and there is no real estate really in the trust. So the product itself has morphed. Your rights have morphed. As a new owner, you don't necessarily have a home resort. As I said, you don't necessarily own real estate. And one thing I can tell you is whatever it is you do own, you own it forever. And in some circumstances, the product is right for a consumer. And I still believe that timeshare has value for people in certain circumstances. And for others, I think they need an opportunity just to take a deep breath, get out from under the ether of the presentation, and say, look, here's the situation. Do we really want to buy this? In some cases, the answer will be yes. In some cases, the answer might be no. And where they go back to the developer and say, well, I really don't understand this properly, and this product isn't quite what I thought. So I'm willing to do that for any consumer because I think it's important that they seek advice, and if they go to the attorney, their own attorney, who's not hasn't experienced a timeshare contract, I'm happy to help that individual attorney as well.
Now, a lot of the exit companies that are helping the owners get out of their timeshare obligations are despised within the industry. They're labeled as frivolous litigators, they're opportunists, they're given all sorts of names, and they're very much disliked within the developer community and even within the HOA community that have been impacted by them. So do you represent that same kind of a threat to these providers as these other companies are doing, or is your philosophy a little different?
Well, my philosophy is a lot different in these cases. Some of these attorneys, believe that every timeshare contract is illegal, that it really is not enforceable, and I don't believe that at all. I believe that people need to understand what it is they're getting, and people need to really appreciate what their obligations are under a contract. But I don't have a philosophy, as some do, that everything should be litigated, everything is illegal, everybody can get out, and that's not healthy for anyone. There are circumstances, of course, where somebody was really, a consumer was truly defrauded, or some situations where a 90-year-old consumer has been sold a lifetime of vacations. Those are circumstances where I think there would be some opportunity to get those people out, and not necessarily by litigation. I've never thought that litigation is the best way in 95% of the circumstances to do anything. But the fact of the matter is there needs to be some transparency. And until such time as people understand clearly that there's no secondary market, that the product is a use product, it's not an investment product. If those things are clearly understood and they want to buy a timeshare, you go ahead and let them and let them enjoy it. And there are millions of people that enjoy their timeshare. And the only reason that we're having these problems now is the industry wasn't wise enough to consider what would happen at the end of the life cycle. They haven't yet truly acknowledged that there is an end of a life cycle. And, I'll help in those circumstances, but I won't help to litigate against a developer, simply because somebody purchased from them.
Your efforts now with the new entity that you formed, are you inviting inquiries from all of the stakeholders, developers, industry providers, legacy resort HOAs, attorneys for these properties? Are you inviting inquiries to have like an open discussion with them, along with the consumers that are really the ones who are providing the funding that drives the whole economy of the timeshare industry? So are you really looking to have straightforward open dialogue with all stakeholders within the industry?
Well, Steph, I don't see any other way to do that. And what's happened in this world of so-called consumer advocates is that the timeshare industry has become the enemy, and they've set up this tense relationship between a consumer and a developer, and there's just no need for that. To me, you need to have the involvement of all stakeholders to resolve issues, and these entities that you asked me about earlier, who have become a pariah to the industry, that they can't get things done because nobody will deal with them. So to me, I've been in the industry 30 years. I know a lot of folks. I've been around a long time, and really the way to do things is to, in most cases, to pick up the phone and work matters out. Same with HOAs. Everything is interconnected. Every bit of this industry is part and parcel of the other. This ecosystem, that starts with a developer or it starts with a consumer, and that never really changes. So you bring in management companies and you bring in HOAs and you bring in exit and transfer companies. I mean, things just keep getting added on. But there are solutions that are evolving that may reinstate value to the original timeshare and help an HOA and help their legacy owners. So the key is not to give up if you don't have to. Find ways to continue to enjoy the timeshare that you've enjoyed for all this time. And in cases where that's not possible, let's have some dialogue and work things out. And I think most of the time you will be successful.
Now, Marty, if any of our listeners would like to get in touch with you, and I'm saying any stakeholders, industry providers, as well as consumers and legacy resorts, if they would just like to explore your philosophy on a one-to-one basis with you, how do they go about doing that?
They can reach me, first off, by email, and it's Marty, MartyKandel, at Tarserv, TARSERV.com. And my phone number is 702-956-0571. I'm happy to talk to anybody for a period of time, and the meter is not running. I'm just starting out in this endeavor. This is a space I want to be in, and I only want to be in it if I can bring value and I'm helpful to owners and HOAs and developers in trying to work out these issues.
Well, thank you for joining us today. I appreciate the opportunity to have this discussion with you. So thanks a lot, Marty.
Thank you, Shep. Thanks for having me anytime.
And this concludes this program on TST Broadcasting. You know that at Timesharing Today, your opinion really does count. If you would like to comment on today's interview, send an email to staff@tstoday.com. Until next time, happy timesharing.